Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Courageous Walk. I am Jonelle Reynolds, and today I wanted to talk to you about how do you know when you have forgiven? So before we get into how you know that you have forgiven someone or multiple people, let's start with figuring out what forgiveness is. And so my interpretation and how I have experienced forgiveness over the years has really to do with the understanding that you are choosing to let go of the pain, the anger, the resentment, any of the negative emotions that are associated with a particular person or persons. And in some cases, yourself. And so it's a choice to release that person from having control over you. You know, there's one analogy that says unforgiveness is like drinking poison and hoping that the other person will die, right? Or something negative will happen to them. But in fact, what you're doing is harm to your own self. And so there are lots of people who their interpretations of forgiveness have to do or is dependent on change in behavior of the other person. But I believe that forgiveness is about you and your internal life and your ability to release yourself from the power that this person now has over you. It has nothing to do with the other person. In fact, there's sometimes when we hold unforgiveness towards other people, and those people don't have a clue as to what we're feeling and experiencing, and in fact, they're living their best life, completely clueless. If we were to wait for them to change behaviors, that may never happen. And so, if we think about how do we know we have forgiven? Well, before when someone does us harm, something bad happens to us, right? Whether it's heartbreak, someone rejecting us, any of those things, right? Or there are also more severe situations like abuse, maltreatment, all of that. But regardless of the depth of harm that is done, the process remains the same. And I just want to clarify that forgiveness is a choice and it's also a process. And no one else could truly tell you what that process should look like for you because this is an internal process. This is something that only you can do for you. No one else can make you forgive, and no one else can forgive on your behalf. And so when I think about, from my own journey, my own process, I use as sort of like a thermometer of knowing where I stand or where I am in terms of forgiveness. There are three things that I look at. When harm is done, when someone has done you wrong, when it just happens, you are so enthralled, so caught up and consumed by the feelings of hurt, of anger, all of those negative emotions that it sort of has a strong impact on your emotions, on your mental capacity, right? You tend to ruminate a lot on what that person did, how you feel. It's sort of like a record on repeat. And then, of course, you can also feel it in your body. So for me, when I get angry or overwhelmed with emotions, I can feel it with my hands going cold. I start to sweat. There's a tremor in my body. Even like my voice will have a bit of a tremor as well. And so I know what my body feels like, when I'm reacting, particularly when it's not a positive emotion. And so the first sign for me that I am healing and that I am in the process of forgiveness is when all of that reactivity is starting to decrease. And so I know that I've fully forgiven someone when I hear their name, I see their face, or come across some sort of reference to them, and I no longer have any sort of reaction. It's sort of like, this is someone that I know, but the story behind it, the impact that they've had is zero. The second part for me is that when I think about the person and I'm recalling what has happened, it's more as if I'm narrating a story of what has happened without the emotional connection. So it's really like I can say, I dated this person, these things happened, this is how this person has wronged me. And really, here are the lessons that I learned for myself in this situation. And here are all the reasons why I don't need this person in my life henceforth. So even if they were to come back and ask for forgiveness, I am in a place where they no longer have control over my thought life, over my dream world, over the way that I respond, or, I tend to avoid people, and try to cut complete contact from them to speed up my healing process. So if they want to find a way to come back into my life, generally, because of the work that I've done, it's like, nah, you have done wrong, and I'm not interested in reconciliation, especially when it's something like relationships and so on. I guess it would be different if it's a parent or a family member. But again, it's important to have really strong boundaries with people who have done you wrong, and to not just keep letting people back into your life because you feel you have to. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. Forgiveness is for you. And if that person is toxic, then and only you should only consider reconciliation if that person has changed. If there's no change, then reconciliation cannot happen, because you will constantly be forgiving, right? You will constantly be the recipient of harm. And so finally, I feel like the biggest sign of forgiveness for me is the level of peace that I feel. It's this sort of like I have been set free from the situation, the events that have happened, from everything associated with how that person ended up or persons ended up hurting me. I have been set free from that. There was just this overwhelming sense of peace that I no longer feel like that situation has any control over me. And of course, right, when we think about how does that work when we forgive ourselves, the same applies, right? Because you have to go through that process of taking ownership for, what role you played in the situation, if you did, um, and then choosing to forgive yourself because, one, you're human, and two, this is a learning opportunity for you to do better. So if you failed in this time, or you have a track record of choosing toxic partners or being in toxic situations, there's going to be a period of time where you're going to have self-blame, etc. Your self-value is not what it should be. But because as a therapist, I'm biased, so I want the world to go to therapy. And I really think if you take the time to work through the experiences that you've had, where you can come to terms with, this is who I was when I was younger, this is who I was back then, but it doesn't mean my past does not define my future. And so there's nothing wrong with acknowledging the mistakes that you have made and choosing not to repeat them in the future. And sometimes the transition from your old patterns of behavior, the way you have always been, right? You've always chosen horrible partners. You have always done X, Y, Z. But just because those are your old patterns of behavior, it doesn't mean that this is how you will be forever. And so you can go through that process with yourself. And I think it's harder to forgive yourself. And that's why I think it's important for you to go to therapy, because now you have an objective person who could help you sort of parse out those patterns of behavior. And my own theory of change is that you get to the root, you get to the source. Where did those beliefs start, right? Where did you learn some of these behaviors or thought processes? Once you get to the root and you fix the root of the problem, it's a lot easier for you to gain healing. And so when you gain healing in yourself, even if other people come and try to remind you of your past, it doesn't mean that that past behavior defines you. Your response to people trying to keep you in a box of your old behaviors will be very different, right? Because the peace that you'll have and sort of the freedom from that experience actually might empower you to be able to share your story with other people, to take ownership. It might even empower you to seek forgiveness from some of the people in your life that you have wronged, right? So it's all a process. There is no timeline, and there's nothing wrong. There are going to be some periods where you thought that you had gotten, to that place of forgiveness, and then something that person does or you hear about and you feel yourself triggered. Some of those emotions being triggered. You just acknowledge those emotions again and then make a choice that you're not going to allow this person or persons or these situations to regain control into your life. You have to remind yourself of the process and then you move forward. So just to sort of sum up, the first is you no longer have the emotional reactions in your body, in your mind, in your soul, the way you did when the situation first happened. In fact, you might not feel anything. And then two, when you recall what has happened, it's more like a narrative or a story of what has happened without your body, your emotions being reactive, right? You can just sort of talk through what has happened with distance. And then finally, there's this overwhelming sense of peace in yourself when you think about what has happened, regardless of, any change in behavior of the other person. And then if you were to turn that forgiveness to yourself, the process is a little bit longer, right? Because you're wrestling with yourself, right? And as I suggested earlier, you get a therapist so that they can help you with your own sort of self-discovery. And so with that, I leave you, and I hope that this was helpful, and this is one step closer to you being able to forgive yourself and forgiving other people. I look forward to the next episode. I'm not sure what the next topic is, but don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you soon.